Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. So happy to have you. Today, we're talking to Karl Bovenizer from Wavelength Coaching, and we're going to be talking about communication in business and conversational intelligence training. Now, all of this stuff is really important, and it's really an amazing conversation. It's just me, Grahame, and Karl, and we really get into some far-reaching conversations. So if you're interested in communication in business, getting better at that, and understanding how to be intelligent in conversations, then this is a great podcast for you. As always, have a magical week. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. And this is very exciting. We've got our first guest of the year, and we'll get to them shortly. But first, let's check in with the team and see how they're going. So, Grahame, first of all, where are you? And second of all, how are you?
Hey, Jez. I'll answer the second question first. I'm well, thank you. Happy Friday. I'm wearing my Friday floral shirt. Where am I? Just in a hotel room in Canberra. Today we are up here for a friend's 60th birthday tonight, and then home tomorrow. I have a weird sidelight thing happening, depending on where I look at that. My face just glows in certain positions. For those of you who are just listening to that none of that makes sense, but hey, that's me.
That's it. And I would encourage everybody to go to Spotify for the video option there. You can see Graham's sort of cinematographic lighting there. So that's beautiful, Grahame. And our guest, Karl, how are you doing today?
Good, Jez. Thanks. Been a busy day at work, but looking forward to this evening for me, and this morning, obviously, for you guys, being the other side of the world.
That's it. We're so happy to have you. I just wanted to highlight this week. This is the only thing that's happened for me is that I've gone and bought one of these tiny little amplifiers. It's a little orange one. And for people that can't see, it's about maybe the size of two palms put together. And I tried it with some stand-up this week, doing a bit of music with my stand-up comedy, and it did not go well. So that's all right. Lesson learned. You can't win them all. That's it.
Will you be adding to the user reviews for that piece of equipment, Jess?
That's a good idea. Yeah, it didn't work for stand-up. Good suggestion, Grahame. Now, Karl Bovenizer, thank you so much for being on the Magical Learning Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you. I know that you're a friend of Jeanette and Grahame, so it's always a pleasure to have a friend on the podcast. Before we get into the topics and everything like that, I guess I'd just like to sort of, for people that may be being introduced to you for the first time today on this podcast, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, well, my work by trade is I'm actually a veterinary surgeon, and that's when I started off my working life. And got into coaching through, I suppose, like a lot of people in coaching, stuff happened to me. And I ended up being introduced to certain things, and one of them I thought, wow, this resonates with me, and I went and got trained in it, and started my journey in coaching. There was initially NLP was where I started off, and then just learned lots of brilliant stuff along the way. And part of the journey on the way, I met Grahame and Jeanette when they came to the Isle of Man, which is where I lived for 30 years. And I'd like to think we just sort of hit off, liked what we were doing, resonated the work we did together, and sort of here I am today, honored to be your first guest of 2024. It's sort of scary, exciting, and looking forward to it in all those senses of the word. So yeah, I suppose I still do some veterinary, and I do some coaching, and sort of was on a bit of a sabbatical after COVID, but just diving back into the pond now. One-to-one coaching. I love working with businesses and entrepreneurs. I think, Grahame, I think we met through business coaching, really, wasn't it? Or sort of working through helping businesses build themselves forward. Yes. and have a better attitude to how
that's correct, yeah,
they manage things. And yeah, very, very canned introduction to me, Jez, I think, but I'll try have a little bit more words in the questions you ask me later on, but that's who I am, really.
No, that was perfect, Carl. And I think it's a great journey. I love where there's different parts to someone's sort of like, journey where there's different things and different elements to draw on. So I think this is going to be such an amazing conversation. You sent through some different ideas for topics, but I thought this one was one that we actually haven't really touched on in a sort of in a formal sense, which is conversational intelligence training and
Mhm.
better brain awareness. Now, these two concepts are very fascinating, and I think we do get into sort of what they are, like what conversational intelligence training is, sort of in the question. So maybe, I guess before we get into what it is and everything, do you want to just list why you chose this topic for us, Carl?
I think my journey in coaching has I think one of the things I've learned over the years, and I'll start from the end and go back to the beginning, is everything comes from the same place, doesn't it? You learn different techniques, you see different things, you read so many different books, and they're all different and they all have their bits to add, but I think it all goes back to the same thing. And for me, a big part of that when I'm working with people, especially working with businesses rather than one to one per se, is how important communication is. And obviously, the two hats I wear in a working sense as a veterinary surgeon and as a coach, communication is the lifeline to what I do. And therefore, anything that deals with that and helps me help people to communicate, I'm going to jump on and try to learn as much as I can. And I think it is so important in what we do within a coaching or consulting sphere or whatever you want to call it. And on top of that, and I think it's very much linked, is and I was one of the things I loved working with Grahame and when we did the work on the Isle of Man, is I think awareness of how your brain works opens so many things, and you don't even have to know everything. I was talking at a conference, a veterinary conference last year in Belfast, and one of the things I was talking about was client communication. And I think I said, look, I'm going to give you lots of tools and tips, as are everybody at this conference. And I said, I don't expect you to learn them all, but I'm hoping that by making you aware that they're there, by opening up your mind to the idea of how it thinks, how it works, how it processes, just is going to help you move forward in whether it's your life and your business or whatever. So that for me, the two things just came together quite nicely. And they're the cornerstone of when I do work with businesses, that they're the cornerstone of what I think is important in moving businesses forward. For so many levels, for working with clients, for working with your staff, for working with your partners. If you know how to communicate better, it all brings it together and you become better at what you do, and then you move to the other things you need to do through communication.
Totally agree, Carl. And I love that insight. So I think this is a perfect conversation, a great first guest episode because we're going to be communicating about communication. So it's always good. I think let's just set the table a little bit though. So I'll start with Alan's question here, which is what is conversational intelligence training? And do you have an example or story where it has helped with communication in business?
So conversational intelligence comes from a teacher called Judith Glasser, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. But I was lucky enough to be on the very first cohort of when she created a coaching framework to use through it. And she basically built up this knowledge and this training from working with companies, where she looked to see what was the problem with the company, and she realized communication was a big part of it. And for me, it's summed up. There's a wonderful quote at the beginning of her book, which I think sums it up to me. And it says, to get to the next level of greatness depends on the quality of our culture, which depends on the quality of our relationships, which depend on the quality of our conversations. Everything happens through conversations. And that's what it's all about. Um, Conversational intelligence itself actually looks at how we communicate, how conversations happen between us. And probably what resonated with me initially with it was it's about the science behind it, the neuroscience behind it. And I know when I was growing up, and I think Graham's a little bit younger than me, but he'd probably just about remember the term sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And I don't know whether you had that when you were younger, but it was certainly one of the things that you were told as a kid when you were younger. Um, and that's not actually true now. We know now that the words we use and what we say can have a massive effect on people. Words aren't neutral. Words can be loaded due to someone's history, to whatever filters they've got. And if we know this and we're aware of that in conversations, we can start creating and building better conversations and vastly improve how we converse with each other. I remember when, again, going back to working with Grahame and Net, the amygdala was a big part of the story in communication. And in communication intelligence, we learn about how both the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex react in conversations to the language that's used. And they, depending on what you use and how you say it, you build up very, very quickly a level of trust in a conversation or a level of distrust. The amygdala will release cortisol in the body, which is a stress hormone, and then that promotes distrust, and then it's very difficult to get a conversation back after that. Whereas the prefrontal cortex releases the cuddling hormone, oxytocin, and that builds trust, and then that brings it all together. And once you start building trust, your mirror neurons come in, you start mirroring the person you're with, the trust gets builder, you get better and better conversations. So conversational intelligence training is all about that. It's about learning, A, how conversations can affect us, and then B, learning how to use that knowledge to have better conversations. Jesus talks about 3 levels of conversations, 1, 2, and 3, where level 1 is transactional conversation, which is all about exchanging data, or sometimes she talks about it as tell, sell, yell. So we're basically, this is the information, this is what I want you to do, get on with it. Level 2 is more positional, where you're both trying to win the conversation. So this is the way I want to do it. No, this is the way I want to do it. And there's a winner and a loser. And then the final level 3, is what conversational intelligence is all about building, whether it's in a relationship or whether it's in a business. And that's all about co-creating. So transformational conversations where you co-create together. I think when I started the course in conversational intelligence, the idea of co-creating conversations was pretty new to me. I think now it's very common in the world. You will frequently hear people talk about co-creating. So I think that's what conversational intelligence is about, and I'm happy to sort of answer more questions. I'm just trying to put it in a nutshell there. Examples of where it's helped. I mean, at the very, very beginning, I think Judith created it from work she did with Boehringer Ingelheim, the big drug company, where she took their drug reps from being rated as 49th out of 50 in the United States by doctors that they went to see. She brought them to number 1 rated by doctors, just by changing the way they had conversations with the doctors. So it went from when they used to go into the doctor, it would be all about trying to justify their drug. And if the doctor brought up a problem, it was basically, well, no, that's wrong because of this. And she turned that completely around to where the drug reps would go in and create a relationship and work with the doctors to find what was going to work for them and to how to help for them. So that's the biggest example of where it comes from, will be from her. But for me, I think in general, since I learned it, in general, relationships become better. You learn to use the word we instead of I. And that can change a relationship very quickly, whether it's a personal relationship or work relationship. And when I'm working with a couple of businesses and I've used it in, there's a big push on transparency, and transparency leads to trust. And it's about working with business leaders that I've worked with and trying to teach them that to build trust, they've got to start with being transparent and create open and honest conversations with their staff. And by doing that, they build the trust because they're being open in the conversation. So we're going back to stimulating the prefrontal cortex, so it builds the trust. And once the staff see that and feel that they've been spoken to honestly, that then will spread throughout the business that they're in.
Yeah, wow. I mean, there's so much to take away from that, Karl. What a great topic. I think, as you're explaining it, I'm realizing how relevant this is to every aspect of my life all the time. So I might throw to Grahame now, though. Grahame, what was your question? And tell us a little bit about why you chose it.
I have no idea what my question was, Jez. I don't think it matters anymore. Karl, that was what a great intro. What a great intro. Thank you. I just wanted to share a couple of really quick things. So that I think one of the reasons why we gelled so well when we first met is the relationship thing matters. I think,
Mhm.
individually, Danette, myself, yourself, relationships really, really do matter. And we tend to want to get to sort of to use Judith's framework, the level 3 space sooner rather than later. A couple of quick, if I can, just examples of things that when you were explaining conversational intelligence and things like language, and I agree, I'm a big fan of being more careful. And I'm not a great practitioner of this, by the way, but I do understand the importance of being more careful in with the words that we use, the language that we use, because as you pointed out, Karl, it can, a simple word can trigger somebody, and the minute they're triggered, all bets are off. Particularly if you're trying to work through to get from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. If they're in that what's the phrase, amygdala hijack space, then you need to address that before you can move on. So,
and you don't
about
even
50,
know what to trigger them. You don't know what the words that are there trigger. That's where the being careful comes in.
Which makes it harder, because that whole sort of self-awareness piece for a lot of us, certainly in my experience in the last 20 years, the vast majority of people that I've worked with, that I've coached, that I've facilitated workshops for, or just had conversations with, and this includes myself, we all like to believe that we are relatively self-aware from an emotional intelligence perspective. So I know what triggers me. And I know when I'm being triggered. We like to believe that we're pretty good at that, but most of us are not. Nowhere near as good as we could be. So, to your point, somebody can be triggered by a particular word or a phrase and not know that they've been triggered. So if they lack that awareness, it's then really hard for them to do anything about it. I was volunteering in a group about 15 years ago. We were doing some support work for parents who were just struggling with themselves and their children, etc. And walked into a room where we were having a training session, for want of a better word. And there were, apologies if I trigger anybody else by using this language, but it's what I've got to use. There were two women in the room when I walked in, and I'm nice and friendly, so I simply said, "Good evening, ladies," because for me, lady is at the time an appropriate term to use with somebody that I don't know. I didn't know them personally, otherwise I would have used their names. So one of them interpreted the word lady as a reference to somebody who's, I think the old phrase was, a lady of the night. Or to be, just to put a frame around it, a prostitute. So me calling somebody a lady, instantly she was furious because I had just called her a prostitute. And I thought, okay, thanks for letting me know. Let's move on. But I think it's really important in that sense. The other thing just that triggered for me when you were talking about trust, because trust is so important in connection between human beings. And I was reflecting that one of Danette's, and we can talk about Danette, so she's not here, so we can actually tell everybody else the truth. One of Danette's great skills, it's going to come back to bite me later. One of her great skills is her ability to build trust with others without speaking. And she does it through hugging. We were part of a business mastermind program a few years ago, and Danette's nickname in that mastermind program was the Mother Hugger. Not because she just hugged mothers, but because she's phenomenal at being able to really quickly build a level of trust with somebody else without even speaking. And sadly, my experience in that space is that it's a lot easier for women to build trust in hugging strangers than it is for men. And we have a lot of work to do in that respect, particularly men. So questions. Wow, that was random. Jez, you can edit this. I'm sure you can. Just going back to the conversational intelligence thing and talking about helping people become more aware of their brain and how their brain works and how it can contribute to a conversation, how it can detract from, how it can block. getting to the next level in that conversational space. So my question initially was, in your experience and acknowledging that you have very broad experience, a lot of work in the coaching space, but working with people, etc. I was just curious about whether there is a reliable framework that you've used in the past that can help people better understand how their brain works. Because I think that the idea of saying to somebody, you just need to become more aware of what's going on between your ears. And then once you do that, you can then use that knowledge to shape how you leverage what's going on between your ears or how you ignore it.
I think it's a really interesting question. When I read that, I thought, wow, that's a big thinker. How do I answer that question? I think bizarrely one of the things that doesn't work is what you just said, which is tell people to be aware of how their brain works, because people don't like that, do they? They sort of just back away from that. I think over the 15, I've been in the coaching sphere in some level or other for about 15 to 20 years now. And I think over that time, I don't think I found one framework. I think the secret is to constantly learn new stuff. And I know both you and Jeanette do that, because we would discuss it when we went out for a cup of tea before she went home to bed at 8 o'clock in the evenings on the Isle of Man. And I think what I've ended up doing is just mash it all together, Grahame, and just sort of use what I think is needed depending on the client, depending on what their needs. I think, I don't know if I'm allowed to even use this term anymore, but I think some people love the woo-woo stuff, if you get my drift there.
Yes.
And some people want science. And one of the reasons I was drawn to conversational intelligence is because the science part of it. When I speak to vets and I do some, training and that, we're talking lectures to vets, I will very much use a different language with them than I will use with other people. They're scientists.
Yep.
They're quite often whatever the current term is for people who are very academically and driven and focused and whatever, and they need the science and they understand the science and they love that and they can relate to it and they'll use that, and they don't like, and I'm generalizing, of course, here. I'm probably triggering lots of people by doing it, but all we can do in situations like this is generalize, isn't it? They're not comfortable with the woo-woo stuff because they've got a trained scientific brain.
Yep.
I think overall, when I sat and thought about the question, I think I've taken bits from NLP. I love NLP. I love the basics of that in thinking about how we see the world and how we filter the world. The presuppositions of NLP, which if we assume they're true, make life a lot easier. So I think I use a lot of that in my teaching when I talk about what I do, because it helps people see that their brain doesn't see things the same way as someone else, and their brain will filter stuff, and that it is just like a big mushy organic computer and therefore can be programmed. I obviously use stuff from communicational intelligence because there's a science behind it and the neuroscience of how it all links together. And I know before she passed away, Judith was working on stuff about how there was actually an epigenetic side to it, how you could change where your genes were based on how your brain responded to conversations, which was fascinating. I think I also use some of the 3 principles. I don't know if you're aware of that. I think Michael Neal is probably one of the big leaders in the field at the moment, but it goes back to Sydney Banks, and that's all about universal mind, universal conscious, universal thought. And it's basically about accepting that there is something out there that information comes from, and you can believe in God, or you can believe in an energy or whatever, and then we have a consciousness based on that, and then we have our thoughts, and our consciousness allows us to take our thoughts and turn it into our world and our reality. So I think I bring all of that together. Listen, see who I'm working with, and listen to who I'm working with, and then build a framework out of that. It's important to me that I've always said as a coach, I come into a room with no expectations and a toolbox, and then listen. I think listening is and again, I think we've had this conversation before, listening is the primary skill of any coach, and only then do you work out what you believe is going to be the best framework to help the person you're working with.
Nice.
But obviously, if you're talking to a full room, have that luxury, and you've got to take a bit of this and a bit of that,
Yeah.
and hope that some of it hits some people and other of it will hit other people. That seemed like a long drawn out answer, Grahame. Did that make sense to you?
It did. Thank you. It's a very, very big question, potentially hugely broad question. But yeah, I like that. I think one of the things that came up for me during that was this idea of not question everything. And if we sort of go back and look at in particularly Western society, our educational sort of culture, we have this idea of you finish school, but if you go to university, you finish university. So subconsciously for a lot of us, it's like, oh, well, I've done with the learning bit. I'm just going to get on with life. And going back to just continuing to remember that there's an opportunity for us to learn something new every single day. We just need to take advantage of it. The question everything, I don't know whether I read the phrase, but it's a phrase I use a lot in coaching, is and we talk about this in the context of change and trying to introduce new habits to replace habits that aren't necessarily serving us, is that sometimes your brain is not your friend.
Oh, absolutely.
And we tend, I think,
your brain is lazy and always wants the easy way out.
Oh yeah. But we often tend to just instantly believe whatever it's thinking or whatever it's telling us or whatever it's prompting us to do is like, well, that must be the right thing because, this white and grey matter between the ears told me it is. So I think that I'm not a big fan of question everything because I think that can be exhausting. But I am a fan of questioning just a little more than perhaps we do at the moment.
Yeah.
And as you said, the idea that just keep learning. So read different books, have different conversations, watch different movies, have different experiences, just expose yourself to different things because it's a great way of then opening yourself up to thinking differently, asking different questions. And, we grow from that.
One of my favorite words in the coaching sphere that I've come across in a couple of different frameworks that I've learned is curiosity. And I think rather than question anything, it's approach everything with curiosity.
Yep.
One of the things we were taught in communication intelligence in trying to create an open and positive conversation, and I love this term, it's ask a question to which you don't know what the answer is. We're all so good at asking the question, but we've already planned what the answer is going to be, so we've got the next question to ask.
Yep.
In communication intelligence, when you're teaching people how to do it and how to be better at it, we teach them to ask questions that you haven't the faintest idea. I've got very Irish there and used the bad word, Grahame. You haven't got the faintest idea as to what the answer is going to be. And therefore, you've got no preconceptions. You've got no assumptions. You've no presumptions. You're just open and interested and curious as to what's going to come back at you. And that brilliantly builds rapport and builds trust in the conversation because you've got to be interested in the person. You've got to have that interest. And that triggers those mirror neurons that you and Danette used to speak about all the time. I'll never forget that as being one of the things that you always brought up. And it triggers that. And the person's brain, their subconscious loves that because it picks up on this interest, on this, wow, they really want to know. And you really want to know because you don't know. You're not making it up. You really don't know.
I love it. Love it. Thank you.
Yeah, and great insights there, Grahame, as well. And Karl as well. Thank you for those ones. Now to not use conversational intelligence and go to a pre-planned question. So I'm going to go to Danette's question now, which is, what are some tips that Karl has? Oh, I guess Karl, this is you. But what are some tips you have about how your brain, how to work with your brain and make life and communication easier?
I think we've obviously touched on it already, I think, because we're having a lovely open conversation and I love it. It's great. But I think for me, awareness is the key to it all. And I said that when I, talking about the talk I gave last year, is that you're trying to create an awareness in how things work. And then that opens people's minds up to that. There's a wonderful quote that anytime I speak about communication, I use at the beginning of it. And I think it came from a Pentagon spokesman. I think you probably may have heard of it before, but I love it, so I'm still going to say it. Pentagon spokesman sometime during the Vietnam War, and he got up to make his press release, and he started off with, or he finished off with, "I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure that you realize that what you heard is not what I meant." And that's, I'll say it again because it's a bit of a tongue twister, but I just think it's wonderful, and it sums up conversation for me. "I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant." And that's awareness summed up, isn't it? You know, we think we know what we're saying, but what someone picks up on what we're saying is not necessarily what we mean. And I think that awareness of conversations is actually such a complex thing, just like that sentence is such a complex thing, which is why I have to write it down every time I use it, because there's no way I remember it. So conversations are complex, and people view them differently. And I think that's the first thing to get across to people, that there's obviously different, and I can use my experience as a vet here. So if somebody's coming in and they're giving me information, and that's very transactional, and it should be transactional because you're gaining information. However, you've got to think a little bit outside that, because what they think is important about what's happened to their pet is not necessarily what's important to me as somebody who's trying to make a diagnosis. So that's very much a case of, if I'm aware of that, I'm aware there's a complex conversation going on, I'm aware that they saying one thing and I could think it means this and they actually mean something else. If I just consider the whole thing as transactional, then it may not work. I may miss something. There's a great word, and as a tip, there's a great word used in conversational intelligence called double clicking, and it comes from when you double click a folder on a computer to open it up. And basically all it is when you go, right, you just said this word to me, can you tell me what that means to you? So don't automatically assume that it means what you think it means. I've run sessions with business people before, and we've sort of come up with a word like, let's say, success, and we've got them all to write down, what's your definition of success? What does it mean? And you can have 12 people in a room, and they will all have a completely different definition of success. And a lot of them will cluster around the middle, but we'll have outliers both sides. So if you don't ask that question, if you don't double click on that, you may miss out what people are talking about. And I think it's that awareness when you're going into a conversation to see it as more complex. And overthink it, but just assume that it's not necessarily going to be what you think it is. I think that's really, really important. I think about how you're approaching conversations, and that word curiosity. So we spoke about going in, asking questions you don't know the answer to. I think being curious about what you're asking, people pick up on that. You can use that to help, and they pick up, and you have a better conversation about it. Approach conversations with co-creation as you go. Again, going back to the veterinary context, because it's easy for me to sort of talk through that at the moment, because that's where my head is after being in vet practice all day. I will have the transitional bit where I'm getting as much information off it, so I then build a picture in my mind. But then when we're working out a plan as to how we're going to treat it, I try to do that in a co-creation mode. So I think about, I know some vets I've worked with will say, this is what's wrong with your animal, give it this, do this, it'll be fine. And that will work in some cases. I've always tried to co-create with the client. So I find out, right, what can they do? Sadly, in this day and age, what can they afford? How can they tablet their cat without losing a finger? Can they do this hour of the day and that hour of the day? And it's when you approach it with this co-creation, the client feels more comfortable about what's going on because they feel there's a trust. They feel you're working with them rather than forcing them to do something. And B, you tend to get better compliance because, again, they're more comfortable with it. So I think approaching with co-creation as you go. Transparency in conversations is really, really good. That's a big thing, I think, in business, that I've worked in businesses where the people who run the business tell you nothing, and that gets really difficult. So there's a problem with the business. You think everything's going to come down in your ears because nobody's telling what's going on. Whereas businesses that are willing to share and be transparent about what's going on, they find they will get much better work with the staff because they'll want to work together because they feel trusted. So I think awareness, know how your brain works, which goes back to your filters, your map of the world, which is an NLP thing. Being aware that your thinking creates your reality. I think that's really important. We all see the world and assume that's what's happening in the world. By knowing that actually what we see as happening is just our creation, our story of what's happening, and that everybody else has a different story. And I think that's probably really, really important as well. Michael Neal, who I mentioned earlier on, talks about inside out thinking. And we're often, excuse me, we're often brought up to see the world as an outside in thing. So X happens, that makes me feel this way. Whereas actually the way our brains really work is inside out. So it's the thought that makes us. So something happens, we have a thought. It's the thought that makes us whatever. So if something happened to me this morning and I'm still angry about it, the thing that happened this morning, it can't be making me angry because it happened then. Someone cut me off or someone said something to me. What's making me angry about it now is the thought about it. And by realizing that and coming to grips with that, and I can promise you it takes a while to come to grips with that. Some people get it straight away, but some days it's difficult to get to grips with that. But I think that really makes a difference. I think I've thrown lots of different things at you there. It's sort of I'm quite sure how coherent that was, Jez, but I've sort of tried to just think of as many things as I can fit into one question and point in the right direction. But I think, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely given me a lot of different ideas. It's, it's in a totally unrelated context. The other day, I was thinking about how interesting communication is in just a sense of like, if you were to say grab 5 people who know how to play basketball and they've never seen a specific play before, and you just draw it up and they can basically reenact it, or if they're whatever their profession is, if they're cheerleaders, maybe it's a new routine, you can basically communicate what that is. And if you were to show a Labrador people being able to just pick up this information, it's almost like a psychic ability, because our communication allows us to create mental images in other people's minds. It's like, to every other animal, it's a really it must be a fascinating skill that we're so coordinated together based on just making sounds. And so kind of putting all this together is really fascinating in the sense of how powerful thinking can go along with creating your mood. What you were just talking about with the thoughts can fuel emotions. And what you're talking about, maybe a negative thing happens at the start of the day, just how powerful our thinking is and how much communication is involved in all that. Again, I don't know if that made any sense, but to me, it's fascinating seeing the power of how much our brain, when we're communicating with other people, how powerful that can be, and then also how much just things that happen earlier in the day and how unaware we can be about our emotions can also inform us a lot. So I think there's a lot for me to take away, at least from that last answer.
I think the secret is exactly that, though, Jez. It's the awareness of that. And so many people go through life not knowing the things we've just spoken about here. And that makes your life so much poorer. It's not going to cure every ill and solve every problem, but at least if you're aware that's how you see the world and that's how the world works, you've a better chance of going, oh yeah, well, that's actually not a problem. That's just me thinking about a problem. Or that's, I think by knowing your brain works that way, makes it a lot easier to find a solution or to feel a little bit happier about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it makes it also less stressful in a sense that you don't feel like it's totally out of control. When you're saying that, it gives me almost some autonomy that I can adjust this. I just have to be more aware of the situation, and then that will give me an answer. Well, I might jump on this as our last question. We're going to have you back on, Carl, because this conversation's been amazing, and we've got more questions to go for next time. So I think that's always a good sign.
Thank you.
Carl, I might end with this question though, which is my question, which is, what insights about how the brain works have had the biggest impact on you and how you see the world?
I think that to answer that question goes back to when I was just a vet, and I had what may be described as a difficult business partner. I think Grahame and I probably discussed this gentleman when I think I was still with them when they were over. And I really struggled, really struggled at the time. It had a major effect on my mental health. I ended up having a mini stroke due to it, and ended up sort of in hospital with it, and found it really difficult to handle. And around that time, someone introduced me to NLP, neuro linguistic programming, for people who aren't aware of what it is. And I found that really, really helpful. And it really helped drive me forward. And I think sort of the biggest thing with that was the whole map is not the territory bit. So we have this map of the world. We create this map of the world because of the way we filter what comes into the world. We get all this information in, and then because of what's happened to us, our principles, our morals, our habits, our values, whatever, all brings us together, and we turn all the information coming into us into a map. But that's not what's really going on in the world. And that taught me that just because someone thought differently to me, that didn't mean either they were wrong or I was wrong. And I love I don't know if you've seen the picture of the 6 and the 9, and someone on each side of the 6 and the 9. And one saying it's a 6, no, it's a 9, no, it's a 6, and both are right. Both people can be right. And by learning all of that, I was able to suddenly be a much, much better place to deal with my business partner. It didn't fix things, but it made me deal with it better. And I saw a lot of what was going on as his problem, not my problem. But I also became better at communicating with him on the basis that I could see he saw the world in a certain way, and he had whatever was going on in his life, and I was prepared to find a way to work with him because of that. And because of that, I then decided to train in NLP, and sort of went and did some training, and with a week's with offline stuff and blah blah blah, and then with a week's intensive training. And I think about halfway through that week, I had what I still call to this day my road to Damascus experience. And I was working with a person. I was the coach at that point, and they were the person being coached. And it just suddenly came to me that this is what I've been put on the world to do. This is my calling. This is whatever. So I think that was the impact it had on me, that I did see the world in a different way. I understood it a little bit better. Didn't solve all my problems, but it made it easier to see a way through. It made it an easier way to communicate. And it turned me into a coach, and it started me on the journey that's led me to speaking to people on the other side of the world on at 9 o'clock on a Thursday, very cold evening in the northeast of England.
Amazing. Well, great insights there, Karl. I've taken so many notes. I think now let's just grab some final thoughts. So, Grahame, any final thoughts on today's conversation and conversational intelligence training and better brain awareness?
So many. We definitely need to get you back, Karl. Thank you for giving up your cold Thursday evening too. It's
I locked myself in the office with the heater on, so it was actually quite nice.
Good call. Good call. Look, so much. I think some of the key takeaway. I love the double clicking thing, by the way. You know, that idea of drilling down deeper into the conversation. So I think the key takeaways for me, one is time. To become better at communicating, to be able to have better conversations with other people, we need to be able to invest more time in them. And so I think it's both a challenge and an opportunity for all of us. Mm-hmm. Is recognizing that if we have the courage to commit more time to an important conversation, or to perhaps an opportunity for a more important conversation, if we can commit the time, we can certainly get better outcomes from it. The other thing was just, we communicate a lot. Most of us do, because there are other human beings around us. And I suspect that over time we tend to believe or just think that we must be pretty good at it because we do it so often. And yeah. That's never true. So again, I think just acknowledging that there's always an opportunity for us to learn how to communicate better, how to listen better, and how to use more appropriate language, how to use the double click to drill down. Probably the keys is just, better conversations take more time. Better communication can take more time. That's a good thing. And we can always learn a little bit more about how to be a better communicator. It's probably the key. So there's so many other things, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, great insights, Graham, and great questions and great conversation. This has been really fun. Yeah, I would definitely say for me, a little bit has been that co-creating of conversations. To me, that concept's really fascinating and something that I'm gonna think about a lot more because you're right, those conversations do really resonate. Um, Carl, do you have any final thoughts on today's conversation and just in general conversation intelligence training and better brain awareness?
I'd like to think what we've done today is a classic example of it. We've co-created a conversation, which has hopefully got a few nuggets that people can take away and learn about. And like I said, anytime I talk to people, I think if you only just take one thing out of this, one nugget out of that, I'm happy with that. It's just think about what we've said, and maybe just if you're aware of one thing out of it, that's brilliant because that will make your life better, and then that allows you to take the next step and the next step. And I loved what Graham said about time. You know, the time, making the time to have good conversations is an investment in the future, you know, and I think that's really important. So the time you spend on that now will so pay off in the future. So it's we all think time is precious. We know time. I mean, I hate the term time is money, but we have only got 24 hours in the day. We've got to use it sensibly. But I think investing that time and having better conversations will produce so much more joy and happiness and relationships. And that's got to be a good thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Beautiful, beautiful message to leave us with there. Now, Carl, before we go, I have to say, if someone's listened to this and they've gone, wow, that was amazing. I want to get in contact with Carl. What's the best places for people to reach out and chat to you?
Um, Probably email at the moment. So I'll give you my email address. It's Karl, Karl, at wavelength coaching. That's all one word, .co.uk.
Amazing. Well, that link is going to be right in the description, so you can go click on that straight away. Get in contact with Carl. Carl, I have to say thank you so much for this conversation. Graham, amazing conversation once again. To everybody that's been listening and subscribing and sharing, thank you so much for that. And as always, everybody, have a magical week.